Tonight on KGW News, 11 hours and counting, with all eyes on a federal courtroom in downtown Portland.
If you file a recusal motion, you're basically laying out to the judge the idea that I don't think you could be fair.
The big change behind the bench, with Oregon set to argue why the judge should push pause on the National Guard. Plus, the Trump administration cuts billions when it comes to clean energy.
At the end of the day, no one state can backfill suddenly a $1 billion gap.
The Northwest Project's now in jeopardy. And later,
but this can save them even 20 minutes, 30 minutes. That's more time that they can spend out in the field doing their job.
How Washington County deputies are now experimenting with AI. First, to breaking news in East Portland, where a traffic control worker has been injured after being hit by a vehicle on I-84. Authorities say that person is potentially a flagger and was struck around 9 this evening and was taken to the hospital with serious injuries. Right now, westbound lanes are completely shut down between 181st and 148th. Police say the driver who crashed into a barrier remained at the scene and is cooperating. Of course, we'll be sure to update you as we learn more. Thanks for joining us. I'm David Mulco. Tonight, we are less than 12 hours out from a showdown inside a Portland courtroom. The state of Oregon wants a judge to pause the deployment of National Guard troops to the Rose City, while the federal government plans to argue the state doesn't have a case. And it turns out that hearing will happen in front of a new judge after the previous one decided to recuse himself. Tonight, Multnomah County DA Nathan Vasquez weighing in, filing this in support of the temporary restraining order, saying in part, quote, "The deployment of federal personnel not trained in local policing to the streets of Portland risks creating, not mitigating, the very conditions it is alleged to target." Also this evening, a Portland woman is now facing charges for assaulting a federal officer. She's accused of punching the agent in the jaw after being detained outside the ICE facility. And that's where we find our Alma McCarty once again. So Alma, it sounds like there's been a lot of activity there in just the last few minutes.
Yeah, David, I would say that, this was business as usual when we first arrived, but then there were vehicles that, of course, exited the facility. And because of that, protesters were pushed back by federal agents. And during that time, there was a bit of a scuffle. Currently, there seems to be some sort of situation happening to my left or to my right over here. But this seems to be between the demonstrators and some of the agitators who we have seen here really all evening. I will say throughout the evening, we honestly saw more journalists, photojournalists, and bloggers and their security than protesters. That is, I would say, until now, while there was some activity earlier, and we witnessed a couple of detainments, including 2 more within the last 10 minutes or so, with someone crossing the blue line onto federal property, one of those detainments. There were fewer folks out here tonight than in previous nights. For the second night in a row, Bennett Hazelton brought his sign to South Portland.
The main reason I came here was not just to support the protest. Even I wouldn't drive 3 hours just to wave a sign. There's also protests in Seattle.
He's here, he says, to counter a narrative he's noticed over the past week.
A lot of the country is only seeing the footage from the people who are sort of making content for the right-wing content mill, and what you see is a couple of highly selective edits.
In his eyes, and in the eyes of other Portlanders, protesters or not, the scene doesn't justify bringing in the National Guard.
No shade to the couple dozen people that are out here, but it's a couple dozen people. The idea that this is even national news is already kind of silly. The idea that it's treated as a national threat is absolutely bonkers crazy.
Thursday night saw a small group outside the ICE facility, peaceful and relatively calm. That is, until an apparent agitator appeared to get in the faces of some of the demonstrators.
Get lost! You're not welcome here.
Shortly after, federal agents were then seen detaining 3 people. And when allowing a couple of vehicles to exit the gates and pushing back the crowd, we're told one protester got maced in the eyes. Not the first time agents have used this tactic.
Every time you do that, you run the risk that somebody nearby is going to get upset and jump into the melee, and it increases the risk of getting hurt.
And again, we are seeing some disagreements, I should say, out here, a little bit of scuffling, but not really with the federal agents. Oh, nope, we just heard some pepper balls be sprayed onto some of the protesters who are standing on the line there, but most of the activity was centered around some of the protesters and the agitators who were in the street arguing amongst each other. And David, as far as those National Guard troops slated to come here, they are still training at Camp Rylea, and it is unclear when they could arrive. We will continue to monitor the situation down here in South Portland. Back to you.
Yeah, quite a bit of activity there tonight. Alma, you and your crew, great job. Please stay safe out there as you cover this. Meanwhile, we are just 11 hours out from a hearing in federal court that could pause the National Guard's deployment. It turns out a new judge will now hear the motion. Kyle Boshi explains why.
Just hours before the state of Oregon heads to federal court, seeking a temporary restraining order to block the deployment of federal troops in Portland, the Trump administration filed a motion asking the judge to step aside. The Fed suggests Judge Michael Simon recuse himself from the case to avoid the appearance of partiality. Judge Simon is married to Representative Suzanne Bonamici.
We do not need and we do not want federal troops here in Oregon.
On Saturday, the Democratic Congresswoman from Oregon spoke out against President Trump's deployment, ordering 200 members of the Oregon National Guard into federal service for 60 days.
This is a gross abuse of power by the president. He does not have the authority to send military troops to a city.
Lewis and Clark law professor Tong Yin explains judges often recuse themselves if there's an obvious conflict of interest, like stock ownership or a close relationship to a party. But asking a judge to step aside is a slippery slope.
It's kind of dangerous. You know the saying, you come at the king, you better not miss. If you file a recusal motion, you're basically laying out to the judge the idea that I don't think you can be fair.
Thursday afternoon, the case was reassigned to Judge Karen Immergut. For several months, a small group of demonstrators has gathered in front of the ICE facility in South Portland, leading to occasional clashes with federal agents protecting the building. Oregon's Attorney General filed a lawsuit and sought a restraining order trying to block Trump from deploying troops. At a hearing Friday, the state is expected to argue the deployment is unlawful. Oregon and Portland will suffer irreparable harm, and local police have the situation under control. Portland Police Chief Bob Day echoed that argument Monday.
I don't see the need for the National Guard at this time.
The Trump administration will likely counter that protesters have caused damage to the ICE facility, hurt agents protecting the building, and interfered with federal employees doing their work. Kyle Boshi, KGW News.
By the way, President Trump appointed the new judge, Karen Immergut, to the bench in the District of Oregon in 2019. Before that, she served as a judge on the Multnomah County Circuit Court for 10 years. And prior to that, Immergut was the U.S. Attorney for Oregon, appointed by President George W. Bush. Stay with KGW for continuing coverage as we head into Friday's critical court hearing, along with updates from the ICE facility, along with any sign of the National Guard. We'll have the latest here on KGW.com and on our free TV app, KGW+. All right, let's head outside on this Thursday night now. Another day where morning rain, heavy in some spots, turned into a beautiful afternoon and evening. Celine Stevens is in for Matt, taking a look at when we will dry out. Celine, how's it looking for tomorrow?
David, pretty good. You know, we could see some slight sprinkles in the morning and throughout the day, but most of the rain we're going to see next comes on Saturday. But right now, like you said, things have dried out. We're sitting at 55 degrees at the moment. Looks like those winds only at 3 miles per hour. Again, it really dried up, and you got to see the sky a little bit later on today. Looking at our radar, you're going to see really most of the shower activity has been off to the east, and it looks like a little bit down south. So the Dalles really being the only area seeing some of the rain in recent hours as it's pushed off to the east. Again, really not looking at significant rainfall as we get into tomorrow. Even today, we saw less than 1/10 of an inch of rain. So temperatures right now across the map: 54 in Vancouver, 52 in McMinnville, along the coast more 50s, mid 50s in Tillamook. And looking at that temperature difference compared to this time yesterday, we're 3 degrees cooler right now here at home, 5 in Vancouver. Other areas also seeing the temperature drop, like at Newport. But as we get into the next few days, again, we get to Friday morning, we're looking at some cloud coverage, pretty dry throughout the day. We're going to get into our Saturday, and that's when we're going to see that rain return throughout the day. Should be, again, light rainfall as we as we get later on into the day, that's when it'll dry out. And Sunday, that's when things will finally dry up, at least for a few more days after that.
Nice to have it both ways, though. Speaking of the climate, Celine, though, we should mention the Trump administration today canceled nearly $8 billion in funding for clean energy projects.
Yes, definitely. And so that's going to be hundreds of them, many of them up and down the West Coast. So together, that means Oregon and Washington combined are losing over $1 billion in federal funding.
It certainly is a gut punch.
The Trump administration has canceled billions of dollars in funding for climate-related projects.
At the end of the day, no one state can backfill suddenly a $1 billion gap.
The Office of Management and Budget Director Russell Vogt posting on X Wednesday that, quote, nearly $8 billion in green new scam funding to fuel the left's climate agenda is being canceled, and then continuing to list the states impacted, including Oregon and Washington.
I think our federal government should serve all people. And I don't think there should be political motivation in pulling back resources.
According to a list the Office of Congresswoman Maxine Dexter sent to the Oregon Department of Energy projects from PGE, Warm Springs Power Enterprises, the City of Portland, and more would all be impacted.
Yeah, so what we understand is that this rescission of federal funding is going to impact 19 projects in Oregon, totaling about $450 million worth of investments.
Without these investments, it will make it that much harder for us to make sure that we have a grid that can reliably and affordably deliver energy to households, to businesses, to our manufacturing sector.
Another big project impacted, the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Hub, a public-private partnership that relied on $1 billion from the federal government. The president of the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Association finding out the news Wednesday.
So we are having to determine, can these projects still go forward? Do the economics work for these projects any longer? And it's unclear. The good news is there are some companies that have reached out to me this morning already and said, hey, even without these federal funds, we want to make a go of it because this market is so important.
These cuts expected to lead to higher costs for Oregonians, a loss of jobs, and more risks.
And one of these projects was to help move from wooden poles to steel beams, and that creates more resiliency in the light of wildfires. If we have energy outages because of wildfires that could have been prevented, I mean, that's real harm to Oregon communities.
Celine Stevens, KGW News.
Well, that is Israeli forces using water cannons on a flotilla carrying aid to Gaza last night before they detained dozens of people. Paul Reed from Portland is part of the flotilla, though it's unclear where he is right now. His mother, Jan, says while she has not been able to get details on his whereabouts and the situation for her is terrifying, she understands her son's priorities.
Their main concern and their main focus is the people of Gaza. And Paul has told us repeatedly, whatever I go through is nothing compared to what the Palestinians have gone through.
The flotilla included more than 40 boats and nearly 500 activists, including climate activist Greta Thunberg, who was also taken into custody. Israel called the mission a provocation, while supporters say it was intended to deliver humanitarian aid and to draw attention to the blockade.